My name is Parth Chanda. I'm the founder and CEO of Lextegrity. Today we'll be having a really hands-on, roll up your sleeves discussion of how Lifescan and Alexion have both undertaken really dramatic digital transformations of their FCPA and anti-kickback compliance programs globally. Specifically, how they've leveraged technology, automation, and data analytics to implement true controls across the life cycle of risk from spend approval through to spend monitoring. Because let's face it, managing a global compliance program across dozens of countries for FCPA and kickback risks is really hard. So we're going to show you real concrete ways Lifescan and Alexion have implemented powerful out-of-the-box software to manage their risks. And we hope we'll leave you with real actionable insights on how you too can transform your risk management program. So maybe we could start with a little more detailed introduction. So maybe Kate, I'll turn it over to you.
So my name is Kate Kiesel. I'm the Global Healthcare Compliance Officer at Lifescan. Lifescan is a world leader in blood glucose monitoring. We have more than 20 million people depending on the company's One Touch brand. We are currently selling the product in 90 countries. Prior to moving over to Lifescan as the Global Healthcare Compliance Officer, I was with Johnson & Johnson for 18 years. 10 of those 18 years were within healthcare compliance, and I am a certified compliance and ethics professional.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Joe, how about you?
So my name is Joel. I'm Alexion's ABAC program director. My background actually started in audit. So I started at Deloitte, where I was there and became a CPA. And then I moved after another interim job, moved over to Alexion Pharmaceuticals in the internal audit department there. And so as we were starting to do audits, I found that the healthcare compliance area was really one that I was more passionate about. And about a year and a half ago, I actually moved from the audit team over to the compliance team at Alexion, more in an operational role, just to help with the continuous improvement of our ABAC program. So I'm really happy, glad to be here, and appreciate everyone having me.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So again, I'm Parth Chanda. I'm founder and CEO of Lextegrity. I'm a longtime compliance lawyer. I led Pfizer's anti-corruption program globally for 5 years. I also served as chief compliance counsel of their global oncology business. Prior to that, I was the lead anti-corruption lawyer at Avon after their FCPA voluntary disclosure, and began my career as an FCPA lawyer at Sherman and Sterling back in 2004. Lextegrity, we're an enterprise software company founded by former in-house compliance lawyers and auditors like myself, focused on fraud, bribery, corruption, and sanctions compliance, specifically end-to-end management of risk with software from spend approval to continuous monitoring with a heavy focus on life sciences. Our software is now the standard in the anti-fraud and anti-corruption space, having been featured in DOJ and SEC FCPA settlements and monitor reports, and with nearly 50% of our customer base today having had or currently facing publicly disclosed FCPA matters and choosing us for their remediation efforts. So I'm really excited to share my insights, and again, really excited to be here today with you. So thank you all. Before I turn it over to Kate and Joe, I wanted to spend a few minutes to explain what digital transformation, now working as a lawyer turned technologist, can do for a compliance program. So it really helps to, I think, understand where many companies are today on that digital roadmap and the common pitfalls that they face in terms of end-to-end risk management. In the last few years after we launched Lextegrity, I've met with hundreds of companies, and here are some of my observations. From an approval standpoint, processes in many companies are often siloed. Third-party processes, HCP engagement processes, grants and donations, conflicts of interest, all in separate systems that don't talk to one another. And as a result, enterprise risk data is siloed, functions are siloed, and the business is frustrated to have to use multiple systems to do very similar things. And many of those processes and systems are manual or clunky, or maybe either even in paper and managed over email. And those processes don't take into account the newest research on behavioral sciences and ethics and what's really effective for employees in terms of managing their risk. And so on the front end approval side, a lot of challenges that companies face. But really after that is where things get hairier in terms of controls. Many companies do not integrate those approval systems into HR systems and payment systems and other enterprise systems, so that there's really a lack of true internal controls. So you can hire a third party and bypass the diligence process. You can provide a donation for more than what was approved. And then companies are left ultimately to rely on internal audit functions to detect those issues and wrongdoing. And that comes itself with some serious limitations. So audits are done on markets periodically, and when they are done, transactions are selected on a sample basis, sometimes using basic analytics like the top spenders, top vendors, etc. So wrongdoing may be going on for months or years before it's uncovered, if it is at all. And then oversight functions, they're still very siloed themselves. So audit, compliance, investigations, and local finance and the business are not sharing enough risk insights with one another. And ultimately, on top of all of this, we have COVID-19 and all the challenges that that brings. So audit functions that are grounded, business that's shrinking, folks that are getting furloughed or laid off, compliance functions that are shrinking, and ultimately not a lot of time and resources to spend. And when that time is eaten up with manual processes on top of fraud risk increasing, it really is a recipe for a lot of problems. So what does that next generation of digital compliance look like? And how does it really upend this old order? So first, it brings together all risk approval processes, ideally into user-friendly platforms that operate across devices, integrates those platforms into spend and HR systems to provide a lot more in terms of strong controls, and then takes the data at the end of that process from those spend systems and monitors all spend, not just a sample of spend and not on a periodic basis, but in real time and using much more sophisticated analytics. In many ways, I think COVID-19 is going to, if it hasn't already, create seismic shifts in the risk management space for companies that's going to force companies to move quicker to this new future. Organizations are going to face pressure to streamline duplicative and low value processes and focus more on controls using technology, automation, and data analytics. So I wanted to just set that stage before really turning it over to Joe and Kate to deep dive into three overarching elements of next generation digital management. So the first, it being holistic, automated, and intuitive, integrated with core enterprise systems, and continuously monitoring all spend. So let's start with that first element. One of the core elements is bringing all of your key risks together and breaking down system, process, and functional silos, as I mentioned. So Kate, maybe turn it over to you. Can you describe your experience at Lifescan of using technology to manage some of these disparate risk areas?
Absolutely. Let me give you a little background of how I came to be a partner with Lextegrity. Johnson & Johnson was a huge global healthcare compliance group, from a corporate level down to the country. There were two platforms that they used that had to be disseminated, and we also had to pull apart, come back to and stand alone as one company to be Lifescan. So it was a huge undertaking to actually separate ourselves from Johnson & Johnson on a global level and then to stand alone as Lifescan. And we had to do it really quickly. The divestiture didn't take more than 6 months. So what we had to do is focus on a platform for both the US and our OUS countries. And we didn't want it to be separate systems. So we found Lextegrity, which actually allows us to have the program in 13 different languages. We're able to use it in every country. We're able to manage through all sorts of HCP engagements as well as external funding and a lot more than that. But most importantly, this was an off-the-shelf product that we were able to implement pretty quickly. And I was actually able to embed specialty things like that I wanted that were important for our company, which was fair market value and a really dynamic workflow. And I would say that I had it all up and running with, of course, Parth's team within 90 days.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Joe, maybe you can share some of your insights from your experience at Alexion.
So we've been working with Lextegrity to build the platform as well. And so it's been a great experience because the tool itself is incredibly user-friendly. Our business users like it, but at the same point, we have the right controls in place here as well. One of the things I know Kate touched on, the approval flows, and we have a lot of those same ones where they're dynamic by country. But previously, we had issues with different countries not using the same thing. So having this in multiple languages standardized it for us. And one of the things that we really liked about it is we were able to build things like cascading questions as well. So if something was not applicable to one particular type of transaction, there might not be additional questions asked. So we have things like that and smart controls in there. People can actively see the status of a request too. So our users really like that. And approvers get notifications too. So sometimes these things, these approvals, while it might take the requester some time to actually put the information in, it can get approved relatively quickly by the automated workflow. So we've had a really good experience.
I'd like to just add one more piece of information there. You know, when you first talked, when we first opened up the conversation, we were talking about how a lot of processes are siloed within HCC. I think the most impactful change that we've made at Lifescan is the fact that it's very transparent now. Not only does everyone get to see by country what that country is spending their HCC dollars on, but really now they're able to relate where they are in the market with their customers, right? Because they're able to see the spend that they're doing with their HCPs and with different organizations. So it's very, very transparent now.
Yeah, wonderful. I think those are some really great insights. So maybe to dive even a little bit deeper, Joe, maybe you can talk about some of that. I think you touched a little bit on it, the level of automation that you were able to achieve in your program as a result of putting technology into place.
So we've had a lot of automation that went into this. The powerful level of automation really makes these complex processes much simpler for the business, and it's also much more transparent as well. So we touched a little bit about approval flows, but we have unique approval flows, and some of it's based on the way you answer questions. And so we're lucky enough that with that, it's very apparent to the users to see what those approval flows are. We've also embedded our HCP master data into this system, and that same HCP master data is embedded in SAP as well as Concur and our CRM tool as well. So those same HCPs, the same identifier is used in this tool as well. And that makes the data integrity much better, and it also benefits our transparency reporting team and just generally being able to have that visibility into all our interactions across all our systems with a healthcare professional. But one of the other benefits too is the tool we have, it's available across multiple devices. So it's been really well received, seeing it both on an iPad, on your computer, or on your cell phone, and be able to access that exact same functionality. And particularly now in COVID too, where people work remotely, this becomes even more important. But at the same time, with all this and the automation, we're not sacrificing any controls. In fact, our control structure becomes more robust because we have those hard stop preventative controls. So having an automated platform to do these and making sure we get the right approvals and the system working that way has been a huge benefit for us.
Great. And I think particularly important today, just not to keep stressing COVID, but we've spoken to a number of companies that recently are struggling with the lack of centralization of this information. Companies that have information stuck in paper files in offices where no one's going anymore, or at least not for the time being, all the way through to shared folders and things like that, where maybe an employee's been furloughed or employee's no longer with the company and recent changes have happened. And it's really making life difficult for these compliance teams. And so I think they're, to your point, Joe, I think really heavy emphasis going forward in terms of centralizing all of these things, having full audit trails and real global visibility down to that country level for all of these types of activities. So I think with that, maybe we can turn to the next item here. Kate, maybe we could turn this one over to you. So another area of complexity that, I faced when I was in my former lives in-house was around screening and having approvals that are very dynamic. So I was wondering if you could shed some light on how digital tools and digitizing your processes really streamline some of those elements for you.
Sure. I have to tell you that this is probably the best part of the system that I like. I have to say that on my whole entire career in healthcare compliance, sanction checks were always difficult, right? You didn't know who was doing them. Were they doing them right? Were they actually coming back? With Lextegrity? Everything is automated. So it's very easy to do global sanctions. They're done automatically behind the scenes. Debarment and adverse media screenings are also built right into the platform. So I no longer have to stay up at night worrying, did someone actually do the sanction checks that they were supposed to do? Because now they're done automatically. I have a single approver who decides whether or not, should there be a flag, whether or not it should come through. And so I know that I've harmonized and really centralized how this is being done. And I just feel like it's such a robust system. The fact that it's done behind the scenes has really brought a lot of automation to the company.
Great. And in terms of your approval processes, I know you touched, Kate, on it a little bit earlier. Can you give maybe a concrete example of some of that complexity that you're able to now automate in ways that where the user maybe doesn't have to think about it, but from your perspective in compliance, the right things happen and the requests go to the right people?
I think as a healthcare compliance officer working globally, I think that it's very siloed before country by country. I think that vice presidents of sales didn't know what marketing was doing and marketing didn't know what medical affairs was doing because there was no central workflow. We were able to build with Lextegrity a really complex approval logic, but it was a game changer for us. I mean, it really, really helped us manage and aggregate spend caps and escalate for certain approvers only if it was a certain dollar threshold. So again, transparency became the new normal in Lifescan because with that workflow, everyone knew within a region. Asia Pac knew what they were doing, EMEA knew what they were doing, and you could see it in all the countries that were located in those regions. And so having a workflow built in so that different departments have to go through the approval process for HCC engagements and for external funding, I mean, has just really opened up what this company's doing. We have embedded functions like country controllers, sales vice presidents, country managers, medical directors. And you know what was really great is because this system was so user-friendly, to socialize this and to train it only took a few weeks, and everybody really was happy to be able to see all the transactions themselves. They may not have necessarily been budget responsible for the transaction, but at least now, again, they knew what was going on in their country and in their region.
Great. Thanks, Kate. That's really helpful. Joe, are you doing similar things? Does that resonate, what Kate described?
Absolutely. Yes, so we have similar smart logic on our approval flows as well. I know I touched on this a little bit earlier, but there are certain things that we have our standard workflows, and there are other ones that we built. So things escalate if there is certain triggers that are hit. We also built an ability for optional approvals as well. So in certain countries, there was a need for certain people that weren't part of our standard workflow that wanted to be part of it. So we have that option that you can add people to approve things if there's certain regulatory reasons to approve those. One of the biggest things that we did, though, was we actually implemented cross-border approvers, and they're automatic. So if a healthcare professional is from a different country than who's engaging them, it will automatically route to those appropriate cross-border approvers. And that was a game changer, not just for us to make sure we get the appropriate eyes on it, but also for the business, because now those people have line of sight into when the healthcare professionals that they may be engaged are being engaged by people outside of their home country. So that was really big for us. And the shifting of accountability to the business is a key point for us as well. We built some logic where it's not everything necessarily comes to compliance. Legal might review most transactions, but we can really keep the accountability on the business and train them less on the system, but more on the guidance for compliance and the appropriateness of the transaction. So it's been a really big time savings for us, especially having a system that really automates everything.
I have to agree with Joe. I think the fact that this system also has on-the-spot training for the end user is really helpful.
Piggyback on both of those thoughts. On one hand, driving accountability to the business, every compliance function wants to do that. But on the other hand, without giving the business the right tools to do it that are user friendly, and Kate, to your point, giving them on the spot training and actually helping them take that accountability, I think that's probably the harder part. It's one thing to want to do something, it's another thing to actually enable it. So it's really amazing insights that you guys offered there, and is a good segue to the next slide, which is really about why we started Lextegrity, was really thinking about the user experience for the business user and really overcoming the problem that I had in former companies I worked with, and talking benchmarking with so many compliance lawyers over 15 years, was really that compliance systems are often really the laggards within the organization in terms of being user-friendly and intuitive and not being clunky. And now you also have a world where everyone's used to using these really slick apps on their phone when they go home, but when they're back in the office, they're using these systems, particularly the ones that compliance and legal sometimes put in front of them, where their user experience is not really fully thought through. So I know, Kate and Joe, you both have touched on this and sort of alluded to it, how this has really been received by the business, but maybe if you could dive in a little bit more about how you thought about and focused on the user experience for the business beyond just the compliance and legal functions, I think that would be really helpful.
So being responsible on a global level brings a lot of complexity. There are languages to think about. Right now, we have 13 different languages in our Lextegrity system, which allows me not only to allow the country to see their local language and to use the system in their local language, but it also lets me then translate it back into English. It's been, again, it's been a game changer since I could do that. Even in Johnson & Johnson, our systems were not down to the local level. So if you were in Japan, it's really difficult to expect a sales representative or a marketing manager in Japan to speak fluent English and to be able to write. So having the system in local languages has been, again, phenomenal for us. But we're really focused on also being able to have a platform that was user friendly so that not only an HCC specialist had to use it, but that the business itself could go in and request an approval for something. So that has been one of the best changes that we've made since we've become a standalone company.
Great. And Joe, I know Alexion, you've rolled this out globally as well. So has your experience been similar? Have you done similar things?
Definitely. We're doing really similar things in terms of translations. We have it in all our major languages so people can answer the exact same questions in that different language. And we make sure it stays consistent with the platform. One of the other things we've had is we've embedded help text directly into the system. And you can kind of see it on this slide. But we have help text that is at some points used for the users, but in other cases, we have different ones for approvers as well. So if they're a supervisor and they may not be an ABAC expert, we try to provide that guidance so they can make informed decisions as they're doing their approvals. So we have been really trying to make it a great user experience, and we get lots of benefits. Also having a partner that is focused on the controls and the user efficiency, because I do think we've seen throughout the out of the box was great, and we've seen enhancements as well to this process that improves the user experience throughout the time. So it's been just phenomenal, and our users, every time there's an enhancement that comes out that makes their job easier, I think our users really love it. So overall, it's been a really great experience from a user perspective as well.
Okay, great. And so maybe then rounding out this discussion around the pre-approval processes, one of the overlooked areas really how these processes marry to how the business itself deals with these risk areas. So obviously the gold standard is really embedding your compliance processes and controls directly into the business process and lining them up perfectly so that it's seamless and as low friction as possible. So Kate, maybe and I know you had to make the transition from J&J to Lifescan, so it gave you an opportunity to think about some of these things in new ways. So maybe if you could share a little bit about how digitizing things and using technology has allowed you or helped you make your program more dynamic, I think that would be great.
Our workflows are extremely dynamic. They can be updated by the business in real time. So if one of the 10 HCPs drops out, only that one HCP can be swapped out. And if only one HCP has an open question that needs to be resolved, the rest of the requests can go and move along with the workflow for the approval. So we get their answers quickly, we begin contracting faster, the venue selection is sooner, and it all happens without compliance being the bottleneck. So again, having a workflow that really brings in the key people in the company isn't slowing it down. It's actually opening up their experience, knowing what's going on, and preventing that bottleneck that usually happens because compliance has to be there. Finally, not only the workflow, but having a robust reporting is really essential to how we can do our jobs, and our systems provide us with that level of insight, and it's all real time.
Great. Thank you, Kate. So this has all been really, really helpful. I think if we maybe switch gears a little bit, we've now talked about the pre-approval side in terms of that end-to-end continuum. If we could turn to the second point, which is really that integration with core enterprise systems. So one of the key integrations that we see from a Lextegrity standpoint is HR systems integration. So integrating with systems like Workday or SuccessFactors can really automate routing to the right people in a hierarchy, especially now, again, in this environment where hierarchies, organizational changes are happening very rapidly, and someone's manager today may not be their manager tomorrow. Those HR system integrations really enable some of that approval routing and accountability to be really clean and real time. Joe, I know you have at Alexion really have led some really great work in terms of integrating your pre-approval system with even other systems. Can you give us some flavor of what you've done there?
So my background on the audit team helped a little bit with this one, but what we did was we ultimately, in the purchase requisitioning process, we started asking some questions of our requisitioners, which we termed kind of our ABAC risk assessment. And in those purchase requisitions, some of those questions triggered a requirement for our pre-approval ID. And we did an integration where only IDs that were approved in the system actually were allowed to be sent to our purchase requisitioning system. So if you don't have that approved ID, you can't move forward with your purchase rec. So this was a good preventative control that we have that ultimately made sure that you have that pre-approval done before you even get a chance to get the spend approved. And so that integration worked really well. It definitely starts controlling. We built this at a global level as well. So anyone that uses our same purchase requisition system is required to get the pre-approval in advance.
Really cutting edge controls that you guys have put into place, and feeds this last prong around continuous monitoring, because I know that integration does enable some of that monitoring to happen. So we're going to dive now into a lot of detail here in terms of how technology can also enable, now that you've gotten pre-approval of that spend, you've integrated it into your spend systems, how are you actually monitoring that spend real time using data analytics? So I'm going to take a step back. I know we wanted to keep this very granular and tactical, but it does help to take a quick moment to level set in terms of what the regulator expectations have become in this space. So, regulators have been increasingly vocal that they now are expecting companies to be using data analytics, and will question you aggressively if you end up in front of them or are not using data analytics. So this is a quote from the Deputy Assistant AG from September of last year. I think I can read it quickly, but companies have better and more immediate access to their own data. For that reason, if misconduct does occur, our prosecutors are going to inquire about what the company has done to analyze or track its own data resources, both at the time of the misconduct and as well as at the time we're considering a potential resolution. So not just what you've done when you're trying to settle the matter, but what were you doing when the misconduct happened? So really, when you think about a continuous spend monitoring program that's using sophisticated data analytics, there's really a couple of core elements from my perspective. So one, that program allows for remote spend monitoring in an automated way. What that means is that every invoice, every expense line item in an expense report, every transparency entry in your transparency system is risk scored and can be viewed from anywhere in the company, from a regional office, from a headquarters office, from a country office remotely, particularly relevant now in this environment. And this is, again, just to emphasize this, that analysis, that risk ranking is done on all spend and in real time, not a sample and not periodically. And then once those transactions are escalated for review based on configurations that you set at a company level, a full audit trail of how they were reviewed and resolved is also a must if you are eventually ever find yourself in front of that regulator to defend your process and what you did. And then machine learning also to apply that to the monitoring program so that it improves over time. And so what does that mean in practice? So what does that look like end to end? So from my perspective, a good, solid enterprise continuous monitoring program takes data from your systems like your ERP systems, SAP, JD Edwards, your T&E systems like Concur, Coupa, and others, and your transparency systems and your HR system, and runs all of that spend and all of the various data points that you have in that spend data through very sophisticated data analyses. And those can be statistical analyses, policy and risk analyses, and also behavioral analyses. And ultimately, what that does is risk scores every single transaction and then escalates for review by internal teams, whether in compliance, audit, investigations, local finance, or others, based on that analyses and giving you a whole workflow to manage that all the way through to remediation. And then now that you have all of those transactions risk scored, you get to the real fun part. And from my perspective, it's just seeing all of that data visualized in all sorts of different dimensions to get really data-driven risk assessment information. So this is just an overview. We're going to dive in a little more detail largely turn it over to Joe, who's implemented something like this to give a really detailed look into sort of what that journey has been for Alexion. So maybe Joe, it would be helpful to start first with what has Alexion's journey been in this space to implement continuous monitoring.
Sure. We first started with a solid base using our pre-approval tool, and then we deployed the Lextegrity's continuous monitoring tool. And I think this was a game changer for us because, as you mentioned previously, it was all based on audits. I remember in my audit days, we were taking Excel printouts and trying to do some VLOOKUPs and other manipulation of data. But this now is an automated way that applies sophisticated fraud analytics that we can control to allow us to monitor spend in near real time and entirely remotely. So in the COVID environment, a tool like this is going to be even more powerful for us, as our ability to do on-the-ground audits, compliance reviews, and investigations may be hampered in the near term. We didn't have any data scientists or engineers or bring in a team or expensive consultants to build this. It existed right out of the box, so it was really seamless to get it turned on.
Thanks. So let's talk about some of those elements then that you implemented. So first, maybe can you talk about the analyses themselves and sort of the level of control you have over those analyses to really sort of right size it to your organization?
The tool gives us dozens of highly advanced fraud detective algorithms, and importantly, gives us a user interface to control these analysis. You can turn them on, you can turn them off, you can set their importance level, even their scoring criteria, which is really helpful because what might be high level for one industry or one company may not be the same for a different company. We can set the thresholds above which we want to see transactions, as well as any automatic escalations. So if there's keywords, certain dollar threshold you want to send, you can set that to automatically trigger out for a review. It's really a revolutionary amount of control for us without any specialized knowledge or in data science. So the out-of-the-box thing really helped basically to come up with this great algorithm to ultimately determine risk.
Yeah, and just to underline that, in my former lives in-house, worked at companies that have brought in outside experts to develop analytic solutions. From my experience, those can be, multi-month, multi-year projects that can go easily into the seven figures. And ultimately, still at the end of that all, you have some nice visualizations. But if you want to make one minor change, you've got to call the consultants back in to add a new keyword, change a value here, change a GL account, or weight a GL account higher, or weight a vendor higher from a risk standpoint. And so, really just to emphasize how, I think you mentioned it, I think you used the term revolutionary. I mean, this really does demystify all of that. There's no need, this is available with no specialized knowledge or skill involved, and really, having a user interface for you to control all of that. And really along the lines of also keeping your program much more nimble and dynamic and responding to issues as they pop up. So for example, your investigation team identifies a new keyword that is probative of something, of a scheme that they've uncovered. You can add that keyword and there's new transactions in the system hitting that keyword, or there's a new whistleblower complaint about a vendor or an employee that comes in. You can risk rank that vendor or that employee dynamically and really change all your risk scoring. So I just wanted to sort of emphasize that point as a follow-up to your point, Joe. So I think you've touched on this. So the analyses then go to something. So they go to risk ranking all of the spend items. If you could talk a little bit more about what value that's really giving you and how that's working for you guys, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most interesting aspects of it was when we first worked with your team and we actually got the out-of-the-box solution. Earlier that day, right before we were going into our test environment, I had an email from someone on the finance team that brought a transaction to my attention, and it didn't end up being a problem, but for certain reasons, he wasn't comfortable with potentially approving it. He brought it to my attention, ended up being fine, but as we launched the tool later that afternoon and I looked through, one of the highest risk scores was actually rated to that exact transaction. So I thought that was really interesting and just showed how powerful the tool was of actually assessing risk. But it's a really clean interface where the system pulls core information about the transaction from a system like SAP, Concur, Medispend, and risk ranks them, and ultimately shows you the basis for that risk rank. So it gives you the actual tests where things might have popped out and why it was rated that way. It's kind of like having a forensic auditor just at your side who works 24/7 to escalate things to you. We were even able to overlay our pre-approval tool with our monitoring tool to run unique tests focused on timing of pre-approval and making sure that what was pre-approved actually was what got paid. So I thought that was interesting. But the risks in here aren't necessarily just limited to bribery and kickbacks. They're related to fraud in general. So that can include asset misappropriation, potential conflicts of interest. There's a whole host of tests that are run in the background that really bring to your attention those that might not necessarily be just related to bribery, but also just risks in general.
I think that final point is really important too. I think as companies are forced to do more with less, I think again, compliance, audit, investigations teams are increasingly going to come together and think about all of these risks holistically. So, while in the past you may have had subject matter experts looking at one risk, companies are really going to push to try to holistically look at risks. And so, yeah, I think you emphasize that this is not just covering anti-corruption and bribery, but just looking at fraud, asset misappropriation. Is someone who's working from homes now charging some personal expenses on their T&E because they don't think anyone's watching? Is someone setting up a charity that might be a sham because they know that the company is doing some more donations in the market? So just things like that, where there's maybe no HCP involved, there's no government official involved, there's just someone who's sort of made the wrong ethical decision in a difficult time. So I think those are all really salient points. And then I think, I don't think I was aware of that time gap between seeing that email come in from into your internal team and seeing it in the system. But that's really fascinating. And I think the whole idea here is that using technology to have an army of those sorts of people who are, in that case, you had one finance individual who brought that to you, but now this technology is really combing everything and looking at so many risk flags at the same time on a transaction and aggregating those together.
Yeah, definitely. A tool like this takes you to the next level in terms of the analysis you're applying to your spend data. So previously, you might have thought, hey, the top 10 T&E spenders or top 10 spenders by value might be your riskiest items. But in reality, that might not be it. It might be like the 50th largest vendor. They're doing other services and things that you might not have caught if you just use standard of these are the highest risk spenders. But it applies dozens and dozens of sophisticated forensic tests to your data at the same time and determines an aggregate risk score across those analyses. So for example, an invoice may be a round amount, plus it's made to a duplicate vendor and a high jurisdiction is missing a pre-approval number. That whole view makes something a higher risk than just the overall value of spend with them. And you're getting that level of analysis on every single invoice, every single expense, every single transaction. And it gives you that level of comfort that we have a solid process in place to overall look at all risks across all transactions. So it's revolutionary.
So now you have that spend item that, the one that you just mentioned, risk rank. So what does the table and the tool enable you to actually do with that?
So, first you look into the transaction, and actually what they've done is built a nice user-friendly way to actually click into that transaction. So it's in SAP, there's a link to that transaction. You can click right into it, and you can see exactly the invoice and all the related spend and approval. It's a really extremely user-friendly workflow where you can track the analysis that was taken, but the other benefit is you can also track the remediation items. So I think compliance folks sometimes focus on the HR implications of investigations and don't invest as much effort into remediation or other controls, policies, trainings, etc. This gives you an engine to set up and track each element of your corrective action plan. And I think sometimes it can also result in general areas where you just need to focus more on training, or you might need to improve a policy or guidance. It can really show those gaps. And I think having this in front of you and seeing even patterns of these things really helps you to understand how your program's working and how effective it is. Ultimately, if the government ever wants to understand what you did with a high-risk transaction, it is all there with a full audit trail. The level of workflow is something you're simply not going to get with a visualization platform. So if you're just using Spotfire or a Tableau, you might be able to see trends, but you won't get that same level of detail that you might be able to get with this workflow and have a systematic way to follow up on all your corrective actions and remediation plan.
Great. And I know, the remediation, what is shown here, sometimes from my experience in my former in-house life, remediation, when you go beyond just the termination or the HR actions that happen with the remediation, sometimes the control enhancements and the policy enhancements and the training and all of those things can get overlooked. They get documented and then they turn past due pretty quickly. And so, I think also being able to close the loop on those things and have control and visibility into where remediation is, I think is really powerful as well. So no, thanks for that. And so I think I mentioned this part is really the fun part for me. So, really the visualizing, now that you have all of those transactions risk ranked and risk scored, visualizing that data, can you provide a little more insight in terms of what the tool is allowing you to do in terms of visualizing the data and aggregating that data?
Yes, definitely. That's a great part of the application where compliance, audit, investigations, other functions can now explore enterprise spend data. Now that every expense, invoice, and transparency transaction is risk scored, you can then aggregate those risk scores up by country, for example, and see the country risk rank by many different dimensions. So you can look at by HCP risk or vendor risk or employee T&E risk. In many ways, it also reimagines our enterprise risk. So we can feed this directly into our enterprise risk program, and it now has more objective data from the different spend systems rather than people trying to generally assess where the risks are. We can then see how country X might be an outlier in a region in terms of its vendor risk score or an HCP risk score. You can even get more granular, which I think is really nice too. So if you want to see at a cost center, a legal entity, therapeutic area, expense category, you can kind of see what's going through there and get some general visualization just on those type of things. So it's been really powerful to even see overall trends as well.
And so that's at a geospatial country level. So what about it from a vendor, HCP, or employee level? What kinds of insights are you able to drive there?
Yeah, so you can see a lot of aggregate risk views at a vendor, HCP, or employee level. It's a hugely powerful tool for our proactive compliance efforts, but will be increasingly used by audit and the investigations team as well, looking into specific things. Imagine you receive a whistleblower complaint about a vendor. Within 30 seconds, you can identify their overall aggregate risk score and identify all of their invoices and see the risk score associated with each invoice and what analyses were impacted by each invoice. So allowing the investigations or auditors to scope their review in seconds without having to manual pull data and rely on other functions is going to be huge. We anticipate this may shorten our investigations time significantly as well, as they can really just go right here and find everything rather than having to dig through all the information.
That's really powerful. And then from a outlier perspective, aggregation is good, but also distribution is really interesting to me. Are you seeing some value in that in terms of what the tool is able to show you, and sort of how far can you dive into outliers and across what types of dimensions?
Yeah, there's all sorts of really interesting visualizations of outliers. So it can be by country, you can see by GL code, you can see across all other different dimensions. I could go on for hours about this tool, but I think overall seeing those outliers and why they might occur just brings a lot of overall enterprise analysis, and it actually helps grow and strengthen the business by providing insights back to those leaders of where there might be outliers and how they're doing in comparison to others, or where there might be inconsistencies in the finance processes where in a certain country, certain people are booking things to a different GL account. So I think overall, beyond just the compliance world, it also helps bring control and structure to the business and organization by different types of domains.
Great. No, and it's a great segue to the closing slide here on this section, is really going back to the original slides around how this next generation of compliance is going to be forced to be more integrated and holistic. You've alluded a number of times to how various functions can leverage the continuous monitoring tool and the data that it's generating and the insights that it's generating. Really, again, in this environment, there's an opportunity, I think, for risk management functions to really come together in brand new ways and to really row better in the same direction. So compliance, audit, and investigations, clearly three functions that can use all of this data in similar ways, using the data and having the data as an opportunity to really reimagine how these functions work. So if you think about internal audit and compliance monitoring and analytics, for example, each of those functions have historically been looking to develop capabilities and expertise and more advanced work in this space. Are there opportunities to bring those two teams together and do far more with less? So can compliance ask audit to maybe redeploy one or two resources to, now that they're not traveling, to monitor transactions remotely in real time, as opposed to periodically and as part of the in-market audit teams? And can this data also be, at the bottom half of this slide, leveraged by the business, by local finance, by stakeholders like the board and the C-suite, to give them much greater visibility in real time to the risks that they're facing, so that if there are problems, which there always will be in any global organization, whether it's FCPA or HCC type of issues, those can be identified really quickly and remediated before they become systemic issues. And there's a lot of interesting things you can do in tools like this in terms of segregating data. So you may not want your country manager or your finance lead in a market to be able to see any data from outside of that market. And so there's really quick things that you can do to segregate that data to give them the power and access that they need, while at the same time controlling the flow of data and not exposing the company to risk there. So I had one other question for both of you. So how does digital transformation like this line up with what your teams are dealing with from a COVID response perspective now, particularly around budgets and needing to justify the ROI of such investments?
I think it's safe to say we're all being asked to do much more with the same amount of resources or fewer. And that goes for the business too. On top of that, everything is remote. So we're extremely fortunate to have made these investments in automation and digitalization when we did. I mean, our approval systems are available remotely across devices to our employees who work at home. By consolidating our risk processes into one platform, we have a much lighter lift in terms of managing. Our smart logic means that we have a targeted group of approvers for any given transaction, no more, no less. So we can keep approval processes as compact and expedited as possible. I also think that we have more powerful reporting, so we can see upticks in activity that might be worrisome. I am having a hard time imagining doing our work efficiently right now without this level of automation that we have because of Lextegrity. So ultimately, what I really want to say is when each of us think about return on investment on these sorts of investments in a COVID environment, I think there are time savings at some point or many points in different stages in the process that we should consider to justify the upfront investment in tools like these.
I'll add on this one too. I actually do think that having a strategic partner like Lextegrity has really helped us along the way as well. If you look at the small steps in our process that we've automated, like FMV rates, profiling, we're saving business 15 to 20 minutes on each HCP in a request. It's already done. It's there. It's used across all requests. So that adds up across requests and across the enterprise to hundreds or even thousands of hours of effort for the year. On the monitoring side, it's the same way. When you have a machine run analytics that would take teams of people hours upon hours to run, and then focusing efforts on only those high risk transactions, it creates significant time and cost saving. At the same time, just helping the investigations team find the transactions in scope quicker is fewer resources that are used trying to find all that information. There's significant gains across all sorts of processes these tools make possible.
I think those are all excellent points and really takes us full circle to how we really are at an inflection point of every company being forced to think about and rethink and accelerate what companies have wanted to do for many years, but now don't have the luxury of not doing. And you both are perfect examples of compliance professionals who had the foresight to implement tools like this before a pandemic like COVID hit. So can you give our listeners some sense of how difficult it is to implement tools like this and what that process looks like?
I would emphasize that what Joe and I described today is available out of the box down to the template questions to come with the tool. Something like this can be up and running in just a couple of months. This is not a 2-year plan. It wasn't even a 12-month plan for me. You know, we were pressed for time after our spinoff, and these tools really allowed us to really leapfrog old ways of doing things without a tremendous amount of effort. And I have to say that this management team at Lifescan is very impressed with the transparency that this tool gives, the ability for us to assess risk. It just has really changed the dynamics of the way people look at healthcare compliance and feel about healthcare compliance because of this tool.
Yeah, and Kate, I would agree with that too. And even on the continuous monitoring tool, it's not just an out of the box project where it's standardized. You can change things, you can change the risk scores, you can change the analysis. There might be some time spent on the mapping data upfront into a unified data model, but then you're off to the races. And with all the ability to change things and just the partnership we're getting with Lextegrity too, we're able to continue to provide the appropriate analysis for our business to be able to make smarter decisions and also assess the risk. So it's been a fantastic partnership, and the tool is really exactly what we were looking for.
I do need to jump in. I mean, you guys, it's been really, really complimentary, and it's also been a tremendous pleasure to work with both of you and your teams. And you guys have made our jobs really easy, and make us look good every day. So thank you as well for your partnership.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.